The sound came first, a metallic shriek tearing across the night sky, then a flash so bright it turned the horizon white. I slammed on the brakes, gravel spitting under my tires, as a jet streaked low over the dark water ahead of me, trailing fire like a wounded comet. For half a second, the world held its breath. Then the ocean exploded. A wall of steam and flame surged upward from the bay, painting the waves orange and black. The impact rattled through the steering wheel, up my arms, into my chest. For a heartbeat, I just sat there, frozen, watching the jet's tail section tilt, groan, and disappear beneath the churning surface. Then the silence hit. No sirens, no engines. Just the hiss of burning fuel on salt water. I was already moving before I thought about it, door flying open, feet hitting the gravel. My phone shook in my hands as I tried to dial emergency services, shouting over the wind. The dispatcher's voice was distant noise. My body had already decided. I kicked off my shoes, threw my jacket onto the hood, and sprinted toward the shoreline. The cold bit instantly, shocking every nerve awake. The water swallowed me whole, black, freezing, endless, but I forced my arms to move. The wreck loomed ahead, burning pieces breaking free and sinking into the dark. Somewhere in that wreckage, someone was alive. They had to be. Hello. My voice cracked, swallowed by the sea. Is anyone there? A faint glint caught my eye, the cockpit, half submerged, glass shattered. I dove. The salt stung my eyes, the wreck groaned around me. Through the warped glass, I saw him slumped forward, blood drifting like smoke through the water. A man. Alive. I jammed my dive knife under the buckle, sliced the harness, and pulled. His weight dragged me down, but adrenaline turned fear into motion. I kicked upward, lungs screaming, dragging him toward the moonlight rippling above. The world narrowed to one thought: don't let go. We broke the surface with a gasp that didn't sound human. The man coughed once, weakly, before going limp again. I locked my arm under his chest, hauling him inch by inch toward shore. Flames from the wreck hissed behind us, reflected in the waves like dying stars. By the time we reached the shallows, my muscles had gone numb. I rolled him onto the sand, pressing a hand to his chest, searching for a pulse. It was there. Barely. His face was pale under the moonlight, sharp jaw, stubble, a deep gash above one brow. He looked expensive. Dangerous. Out of place in my quiet little world. His hand shot out suddenly, gripping my wrist with startling strength. His eyes fluttered open, dark, unfocused, but burning with some unspoken fear. No police, he rasped. Then his hand fell away. I knelt there, shaking, waves lapping at our feet, staring at the man I'd just pulled from a burning jet. I didn't know who he was or why he'd fallen out of the sky, but something in his voice made my stomach turn cold. I thought I'd just saved a stranger. I was wrong. Before we continue, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more exciting stories that you won't want to miss. The walk from the beach to my cottage felt endless. Lucius Greco, though I didn't yet know his name, sagged against me, his dead weight forcing me to stop every few steps and gasp for air. My arms screamed, my legs shook, but I kept going, dragging him through wet sand and sea-slick grass toward the porch light flickering in the distance. The wind off the bay cut through my soaked clothes, but adrenaline pushed me forward like a second heart. When we finally reached the steps, I had to brace him against the railing while I fumbled the key into the lock. Inside, the house smelled like salt and lemon oil and everything I thought was safe. I eased him down onto the faded couch, every cushion soaking through instantly as seawater and blood seeped from his clothes. Up close, under the glow of my reading lamp, he looked worse than he had on the sand, pale, lips tinged blue, sweat already slick on his brow. His dress shirt was half shredded, exposing a lean torso marred by bruises and fresh cuts. I paused, hand hovering near his chest, heart pounding with one simple question: what the hell have I done? I found my hands moving before my mind caught up, pulling the old first aid kit from the hall cabinet, snapping on gloves, tearing gauze with my teeth. My breath came hard and fast through clenched teeth as I cut away what was left of his shirt, fingers shaking but deliberate. That's when I saw it, a black leather shoulder holster strapped tight across his chest, molded to fit a sleek, matte pistol. My gut twisted. This man wasn't just rich. He was dangerous. I unfastened the holster and set it on the far end of the coffee table, careful not to touch the gun. Something about the way it sat, like it belonged there, like it had done this before, made me feel cold. I tried not to look at it as I turned back to him, lifting the corner of his jacket and finding the wallet pressed against his ribs, soaked and nearly ruined. Inside, there was a stack of hundreds, folded tight and banded with a gold money clip. The name on the ID glared at me in all caps, Lucius Greco. Greco. The name rang a warning bell somewhere in the back of my head, something half-remembered from late-night news, muttered headlines in the background of a bar TV. I stared at his face again, this time seeing the sharpness beneath the bruising. The expensive cut of his trousers, the European tailoring. The kind of man who didn't sit in economy or carry anything less than custom. I just dragged a Mafia boss into my living room. Lucius stirred with a grunt, his eyes fluttering open just enough to look dazed and unfocused. He muttered something in Italian, a string of syllables that sounded both fevered and rehearsed, like prayers or secrets. I crouched beside him and gently pressed gauze to the wound above his eye, dabbing away the blood before it could pool into his lashes. His body twitched beneath my hands, muscles seizing from pain or cold, or both. "Shoo," I murmured without thinking, brushing wet hair from his face. "You're safe. For now." I should have called the hospital. I should have called the police. But I kept hearing his voice from the beach, hoarse, raw, terrified. No police. It wasn't just a fear of arrest. It was something bigger. Deeper. Like he knew if he disappeared into a hospital bed, he wouldn't come out again. He flinched, suddenly grabbing my wrist, eyes snapping open like a man surfacing from a nightmare. "They'll kill us both," he rasped. The words came broken, like each syllable was dragging glass through his throat. I froze. "Please," he added, weaker now. "Don't let them find me." I nodded, heart hammering, my free hand hovering just above his. "Okay," I whispered. "No police." He released my wrist with a sigh like it had cost him everything to hold on. His body sagged back against the couch. My own breath left me in a shudder. I'd just agreed to protect a man I knew nothing about, a man with a gun, a name that sparked fear, and blood on his hands that may not have come from the crash. I worked in silence after that. Cleaned the gash on his temple, wrapped it tight. His ribs were bruised, maybe cracked, but his breathing held steady under my hand. I bandaged a gash along his side and stabilized his wrist with the roll of elastic wrap I always kept for emergencies. The last time I'd used it had been for a sprained ankle. This time, it was a bullet graze. Or worse. His wallet had no credit cards. Just the cash, the ID, and a thin, laminated contact sheet, one phone number, no name. It looked like something that would self-destruct in a movie. I hesitated, then laid it beside the holster. There were too many questions and no good answers. By the time I finished patching him up, it was nearly 3 a.m. I stripped off my wet hoodie, threw on an old flannel, and wrapped a dry blanket around him. His breathing was rough, but rhythmic. Still unconscious, still burning up. I placed the back of my hand on his forehead. He needed fluids, antibiotics, rest. None of which I had in full supply. What I did have was one very real certainty. If anyone found him here, I'd be complicit in whatever war was chasing him. I moved around the living room on autopilot, clearing the bloody towels, rinsing the basin, folding gauze wrappers into the trash. The lamp cast soft gold across the room, catching on the dark wood of the coffee table and the dull gleam of the pistol still resting there. I paused, staring at it, feeling the weight of that choice settle in my chest. This wasn't a rescue anymore. It was a secret. And secrets this big always came with a cost. I had just curled up in the armchair, intent on watching him through the night, when it happened. A faint buzz. Then another. I shot upright. The sound came from the corner of the room, from the rotary landline I kept mostly for my grandmother's calls. The handset lay off the hook, the line humming. I picked it up and saw the display blinking. Last number dialed, active. I didn't remember hearing him call. But somewhere in the haze, he must have reached it. My stomach twisted. If someone was on the other end, listening, if that number was traceable. I rushed to unplug the line. Too late. Outside, far down the road, I saw it. Headlights. 5 of them. Approaching in formation, too fast for delivery vans, too smooth for tourists. One after another, black SUVs rolled over the rise like sharks slicing through the quiet. No sirens. No honking. Just silent power closing in. My breath caught. He'd made a call. And now they were coming. The low rumble of engines dragged me out of sleep like a warning in a dream. My eyes snapped open to soft morning light filtering through the curtains and the sound of tires crunching slowly over gravel. I sat upright in the armchair, blinking hard, heart already racing. Then came the second sound, doors clicking open in unison. Multiple. Heavy. Controlled. I slipped from the blanket, pulse quickening as I crossed to the window. Peeking through the slats, I counted 5 black SUVs parked in a neat formation across my front yard. Not local cops. Not military. These vehicles gleamed with the kind of polish that meant money, and the men stepping out wore matching expressions: blank, efficient, dangerous. Tactical vests, sidearms, radios clipped to their chests. Not a badge among them. One of them scanned the porch, eyes sweeping until they landed on the security camera I hadn't touched in over a year, a fake I'd mounted for comfort more than protection. He tapped his earpiece and nodded toward the house. I backed away from the window, heart hammering now. They knew I was inside. And they weren't here by accident. Behind me, Lucius stirred on the couch, letting out a pained breath as he shifted under the blanket. I crossed to him instinctively, crouching low to check his pulse and his bandages. Still alive. Still barely conscious. And now he'd brought a private army to my front yard, or his enemies had followed the signal he sent, and we were about to die. A sharp knock rattled the front door. I jumped, every nerve on edge, and looked back toward it like it might explode inward. Another knock. Firm, deliberate, but not frantic. A voice followed, low and clipped. Miss Capon? We mean no harm. We're here for Mr. Greco. My stomach clenched. Mr. Greco. So they knew who he was, and they knew who I was too. I shot a glance toward the phone, still unplugged. Didn't matter. The call had already gone through. I crossed to the front door but didn't unlock it. Name. I called through the wood, trying to keep my voice steady. A pause followed. Then, Matteo Russo. I'm his second. He made a call. You answered it. I hesitated, gripping the door frame with clammy fingers. I wanted to believe him. But believing people like this could get you killed. I needed proof. Something better than a smooth voice and a suit. I cracked the door a few inches and slipped the chain into place. Through the gap, I saw a man in his mid-40s, sharp-cut hair, weathered face, wearing all black. His hands were visible, no weapon drawn, but the holster at his hip said he didn't need to threaten. Behind him, several others fanned out along the yard, scanning the perimeter. One checked behind the SUV, another stared toward the treeline. They moved with tight coordination. These weren't thugs. They were trained, calm, and on a mission. But that didn't make them safe. Tell me something only he would know, I said, keeping my voice hard. Matteo blinked once. He hates hospitals. Keeps a stitched scar behind his left ear from a job in Palermo. And he never ever calls unless he's dying. My chest squeezed. That last part landed harder than I expected. Behind me, Lucius groaned, his voice rasping out something unintelligible. Matteo's head snapped up. He's alive. I didn't answer. Instead, I closed the door, undid the chain, and opened it fully. The men behind Matteo visibly tensed, not in threat, but in preparation. Ready for whatever came next. Inside. Slowly, I said, standing firm. Matteo nodded once and gestured for only 2 men to follow. They stepped in without a word, eyes scanning every corner of my small living room. Their gazes softened slightly when they saw Lucius lying there, pale and broken. One of them actually whispered a curse under his breath. Matteo crossed to Lucius and crouched beside him, eyes taking in every bandage, every bruise. "Boss," he murmured, gently touching his shoulder. Lucius flinched but didn't wake. Matteo exhaled, a trace of emotion breaking through the steel. "You weren't supposed to go down like this." I stood a few feet back, arms crossed over my chest, still dripping adrenaline. The other two men checked the back door and windows, then gave Matteo a subtle nod. It wasn't until that moment that I realized just how out of my depth I truly was. I wasn't just in the presence of criminals. I was standing in a room with people who operated in a different world, one where silence and loyalty were currency. Matteo stood and turned to me, his expression unreadable now. "You saved his life," he said. I didn't respond. That means something. To us. There was a weight behind those words I couldn't quite name. Not a threat. Not yet. "I didn't do it for favors," I said, voice hoarse. "I did it because he was dying. That's it." Matteo studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded, slow and deliberate. "Understood. But that doesn't change what comes next." That stopped me cold. "What comes next?" I asked, dreading the answer. He didn't reply, just turned to speak into his earpiece. "We've got him. Prep transport. Secure perimeter. No one in or out." Through the open door, I watched as the rest of the SUVs powered down and their drivers stepped out. More men, maybe 10 in total now, moved through my yard like they'd done it 100 times before. One of them disappeared around the side of the house. Another lit a cigarette, completely unfazed by the morning chill. My skin prickled. Something felt wrong. It wasn't the coordination. It was the energy, the way one man, just past the second SUV, lingered near the tree line, head low, radio untouched. He didn't follow the others. He watched. Not me. Not Lucius. Matteo. And then, barely a twitch, he tapped his shoulder twice. A subtle signal. Deliberate. I stepped backward slowly, my stomach dropping. Something about that gesture set every alarm in my brain blaring. I looked toward Matteo, debating whether to speak, whether to trust him enough to say what I saw. Outside, the man moved again. This time, his hand slipped beneath his coat. If you were in Concetta's shoes, would you trust the men who claim to be allies, or would you run? Let me know in the comments what you think you would have done. Right arrow, want to see what happens next? Hit subscribe and follow along. Lucius stirred under the blanket, face twitching as if some part of him sensed the storm building outside. I crouched beside him, my hand brushing his shoulder gently, trying not to jostle the gauze taped above his ribs. "Lucius," I whispered low, barely louder than breath. "There's a man outside. He's watching Matteo, not guarding. He just gave a signal, like he's waiting for something." His eyes cracked open, unfocused, but alert in a way that sent a shiver through me. One of his fingers twitched, then curled around my wrist with surprising force. I leaned closer, and he rasped in my ear, "Tell Matteo." "Now." His voice was shredded, barely there, but every syllable landed like an order. I nodded and rose quickly, scanning the room for Matteo as tension wrapped tighter around my chest. Two of his men stood at the front window, alert, but Matteo had stepped outside, talking into his earpiece, unaware. I pushed open the door and stepped onto the porch, barefoot and trembling. "Matteo," I called, not loudly, but sharply enough to cut through the early morning quiet. He turned just as I descended the steps. I reached him and leaned in fast, words tumbling out. "The man by the trees, far left SUV. He's not watching the house, he's watching you." He gave a signal. Twice. Matteo stiffened, eyes narrowing instantly as he flicked his gaze toward the spot I mentioned. The man was still there, hands in his coat now, still, too still. Matteo exhaled slowly, then murmured, "Stay behind me." He pivoted on his heel and signaled with 2 fingers to one of the guards posted near the front of the convoy. They began moving. But it was already too late. The traitor by the trees raised his arm, and the flash of muzzle fire broke the morning apart. Matteo shouted, diving for cover as the guard beside him crumpled. Another gunshot followed, then another, then the unmistakable whine of bullets slicing the air. Screams erupted. The lawn exploded into chaos. More shots came from the back of the property, too, maybe 3 men firing from behind trees and hedges. They had been hiding in plain sight. In seconds, the black SUVs that had once looked like fortresses became targets. One of them, parked closest to the porch, burst into flames with a thunderous boom that knocked me back against the doorframe. Glass shattered across the gravel. Smoke filled the sky. I scrambled back into the house, heart slamming, ears ringing. "Lucius!" I gasped, ducking low as bullets tore through the front windows. He was sitting up now, barely, his face pale and glistening with sweat. "We have to move," I said, crossing to him, crutched. "Now. You have to help me." He nodded faintly, grimacing as I looped his good arm around my shoulders. Every step was agony. For him and for me. But we moved, half drag, half crawl, toward the back hallway, toward the hatch to the storm cellar beneath the kitchen. The house groaned as rounds thudded into the walls, shattering family photos and blowing out light fixtures. I flung open the cellar door and helped Lucius descend, step by step, one agonizing moment at a time. It was dank, dark, full of old garden tools and mildew, but it was below ground and windowless. Safety. Or something close enough. I pulled the hatch closed behind us just as another wave of gunfire shook the ceiling. We collapsed to the floor, gasping. I rolled him onto his side, pressed my hand against his ribs again, blood seeping through the bandage. Faster now. "You're okay," I murmured, more for myself than for him. "You're okay. Stay with me. I've got you." His hand found mine, weak but still there. "Matteo," he breathed. "Is he?" I shook my head. "I don't know. I don't know anything." I felt useless and furious and terrified all at once. Upstairs, I heard footsteps, fast, heavy, then shouting in Italian. The sound of more gunfire followed, then silence, then a scream. A man. Not one I recognized. I held my breath and kept Lucius close, praying we weren't found. Every creak of the floorboards above was a countdown I couldn't stop. Minutes passed, felt like years. I counted the thud of my pulse in the silence. Lucius drifted in and out beside me, eyes fluttering, breath shallow. I tore open what remained of my emergency kit and pressed another layer of gauze to his side. My hands shook as I worked, blood already soaking through. Eventually, the noise above began to fade, less gunfire, fewer boots. A door slammed. Tires peeled out. The scent of burning rubber and fuel drifted down through the cracks. I stayed still, frozen, not daring to move until the world held still again. Then, finally, I rose. I cracked the hatch just enough to peek into the kitchen. The window above the sink was shattered. Smoke curled through the open front door. I couldn't hear gunfire anymore. Just the crackle of flames and someone groaning outside. "Wait here," I whispered, even though Lucius couldn't reply. I climbed out slowly, barefoot and trembling, my arms smeared with soot and blood. My little cottage looked like it had been shelled. Furniture overturned. Curtains burning. One of Matteo's men lay near the front door, clutching a shoulder wound. I stepped over him carefully, whispering that help would come. Then I walked out onto the porch and saw the true wreckage. One SUV still smoldered, metal warped and black. Two more had bullet holes like Swiss cheese. Bodies lay across the lawn, 3 of the attackers, and at least 2 of the guards. Matteo knelt in the grass, blood streaming from a cut above his brow. He looked up at me, dazed but breathing. "We lost 4, he said hoarsely, and the bastards nearly took him again." His eyes burned. "There was a mole. One of ours. Slipped off during the attack." I nodded slowly, heart sinking. "I think I saw him signal before it started," I murmured. "I just didn't know what it meant." Matteo shook his head, face hardening. "You saw more than some of my men did. That makes you part of this now." I didn't argue. How could I? Blood stained my hands. My walls. My lawn. There was no undoing what had happened here. No pretending I could still go back to cataloging starfish and writing research papers by the bay. I turned back toward the house, smoke rising from behind me, and whispered aloud what I hadn't yet admitted, even to myself. This isn't just about saving him anymore. The road out of my village was still wet with blood and ash as the convoy sped toward the hills. I sat in the back seat, one arm braced under Lucius's shoulders as he drifted in and out beside me. His skin was clammy, too pale under the shifting shadows of the passing trees. Matteo drove with a grim, focused silence, only speaking into his comms to issue clipped updates. Around us, the black SUVs moved like shadows, wounded but still formidable. After nearly an hour of winding roads and whispered coordination, we pulled through iron gates that parted like jaws. The vineyard stretched out before us, golden under the afternoon light, rows of vines cut through rolling green like scars. The main house rose at the top of the hill, not a cottage like mine, but a villa, pale stone and glass, with a long driveway lined by cypress trees. The whole place screamed old money, power, and privacy. But even in its elegance, something in my chest stayed tight. Staff met us at the drive, quiet and efficient, not surprised, not shaken. Two medics helped lift Lucius from the car, guiding him into the house with a stretcher and whispers in Italian I couldn't follow. I trailed behind, my clothes still streaked with soot and blood, shoes forgotten back at my porch. The interior of the villa was cool and pristine, marble floors, velvet-lined walls, the faint scent of lavender clinging to the air. I couldn't tell if it felt like a sanctuary or a stage. Matteo escorted me to a guest room on the west wing, a space with soft linens, wide windows, and a carved wooden wardrobe that probably cost more than my tuition. "You'll be safe here," he said, before adding, "we think." That last part lingered like smoke. I nodded numbly, barely processing as a housekeeper brought me fresh clothes, water, and a quiet offer of food. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep either. Hours passed in fragments. At some point, someone came to clean the shallow cuts on my arms, then disappeared just as quickly. Through the high windows, I watched the sun lower itself behind the vines, bleeding orange over the hills. I couldn't stop thinking about the man I'd stabbed back home. Not his face, I never saw that clearly, but the sound. That awful, wet gasp when the blade sank in. Lucius was still alive, they told me. Stable, but unconscious. The medics had flushed the wound, stabilized his breathing, and started a slow 4. "He's strong," one of them said as he passed me in the hall. "He'll pull through." I wanted to believe him, for Lucius's sake and my own. It was close to dusk when Matteo finally summoned me. I followed him through quiet hallways until we reached a private study, tucked behind double oak doors. Lucius lay propped in a bed, cleaner now, shirtless, bandages winding around his chest and arm like silk armor. His eyes opened slowly as I entered, heavy, tired, but sharp. They landed on me like gravity. "You stayed," he said, voice hoarse but warm. "Of course I did," I replied, crossing to the edge of the bed. He studied me for a long moment, something unreadable flickering behind his expression. "You could have run. After everything." I looked down at my hands. I couldn't. Lucius shifted slightly, wincing. "Why?" he asked simply. "Why help me?" My throat tightened, but I forced the words out. "Because my father went missing at sea 7 years ago," I said. "And no one tried to save him." "Not really." I couldn't let someone else disappear alone. Silence fell like velvet between us. Lucius reached out, his hand resting on mine with a surprising gentleness. "Your father. You still don't know what happened?" I shook my head. "Only that he took his boat out one night and never came back. The Coast Guard found his jacket. That was it." Lucius nodded, and something like understanding passed between us. For a moment, neither of us were the people we had been 2 nights ago. Not the Mafia boss. Not the girl with the dive knife. Just 2 strangers marked by water, by grief, by survival. That night, I lay in the oversized guest bed, the vineyard outside quiet under a half-moon sky. But I didn't feel safe. The silence was too perfect. Like something was waiting to move. My knife sat under my pillow, the same blade I'd used to cut Lucius free from the wreckage, the same one I'd buried in a man's side. Just after midnight, I heard it, a soft creak near the window. My body snapped awake before my mind could. I rolled silently, fingers wrapping around the knife's hilt. The window latch clicked. Someone was opening it from the outside. I didn't breathe. A shadow slithered through the opening, slow and precise. Not a guard. Not staff. This was someone who knew how to move like smoke. I let him get 1 step inside before I surged forward, no scream, no warning, and drove the knife into his side. His breath caught. His eyes went wide. He flailed, grabbing at my arms, but I'd already twisted the blade free. Blood sprayed across the sheets. I shoved him back through the window. He collapsed on the stone terrace outside with a thud. I didn't stop shaking. I backed away from the window, clutching the knife, my breath ragged. Another figure moved in the dark below, running. I bolted for the door and flung it open. Intruder! I shouted down the hall. West Wing. Guards came fast. 3 of them sprinted from the corridor and took position outside the window while another checked the terrace below. Matteo arrived moments later, followed by 2 more. Then Lucius, shirtless, bleeding through his bandages, leaning on the doorway with wide eyes. He looked past the blood on my hands, the knife still in my grip. His gaze landed on the body by the terrace wall. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded slowly. He was in my room. I didn't wait. Lucius stared at me, a strange expression softening his features. "Good," he said. Then he stepped closer, ignoring Matteo's protests, and placed a hand on my cheek. "You're still breathing. That's all that matters right now." And for the first time since this began, I let someone see me break. If someone broke into your room in the dead of night, would you freeze, run, or fight? Let me know in the comments how you'd react, and don't forget to subscribe to see how Concetta's story twists next. Things are only getting more dangerous from here. The next morning broke over the vineyard in a wash of gray light and uneasy quiet. I hadn't slept since the attack. The image of that intruder's eyes still burned behind mine. Downstairs, guards moved in tighter formations now, radios murmuring in clipped Italian. Every door had been checked twice, every lock reinforced, but security didn't feel like safety anymore. It felt like a countdown. Lucius had refused the medic's orders to rest. When I found him in the study, he was seated at a heavy oak desk, a silk robe draped over his shoulders, a phone pressed to his ear. Matteo stood near the window, listening to an encrypted call from one of their contacts in Palermo. Papers and photos lay spread across the desk, maps, cargo manifests, something that looked like a ledger. Lucius's gaze lifted briefly when he saw me, then softened with the quiet recognition of someone who'd been waiting. "You shouldn't be up," I said, stepping into the room. "And you shouldn't still be here," he replied calmly, voice rough but controlled. Yet here we are. I crossed my arms, bracing against the exhaustion tugging at me. "You're welcome, by the way. For last night." His mouth twitched in what could have been a smile, or something heavier. "I already thanked you," he said, though the words came softer than before. Matteo turned away from the phone and approached, holding out a slim folder. "Boss, we found it," he said quietly. "Background check you requested." I blinked, confused. Lucius's expression didn't change, but something in the air shifted, the quiet hum before lightning strikes. He dismissed Matteo with a subtle nod. When the door clicked shut behind him, Lucius leaned back, eyes tracing the folder on the desk as if deciding whether to open it. "You're going to hate me for this," he said finally. "For what?" I asked warily. He slid the folder toward me. "For what I found out about your father." I froze. The room seemed to narrow until it was just that folder, a thin manila weight between us. My pulse pounded in my ears as I sat down slowly. "What do you mean, found out?" Lucius rubbed his temple, his other hand still pressing against his healing ribs. "Matteo's contacts in Sicily confirmed it. Your father didn't just vanish at sea, Concetta. He was working." The words hit harder than I expected, each syllable a knife twist. "Working?" I echoed. "For who?" Lucius hesitated, then met my eyes. "The Sicilian Syndicate." He ran contraband shipments through the same smuggling routes my family once used. Fishing boat by day, cargo mule by night. I felt something inside me crack, not cleanly, but like a fault line splitting after years of quiet pressure. "That's impossible," I said, shaking my head. "My father hated men like you. He wouldn't have touched that world." Lucius said nothing, only slid a photo from the folder, an old image, grainy but clear enough. My father stood beside a younger man I didn't recognize, crates stacked high behind them. The crest on one box was unmistakable. Greco Industries. I pushed the picture away like it was poison. "No, you're wrong." The words came out brittle, small. "He was a fisherman. He taught me how to swim, how to map tides, not how to." My throat closed. Lucius's gaze softened. "I didn't want to believe it either," he said quietly. "But the records are real. Anger flared before reason could catch it. So what? I snapped. You think I'm here because of him? That I dragged you out of the water as part of some master plan. Lucius flinched at the venom in my tone, but didn't look away. No, he said, steady. But it's possible fate put you in my path for a reason neither of us understands. I let out a bitter laugh, pacing toward the window. Fate, I repeated. That's rich coming from a man who controls half of Italy's underground routes. You don't believe in fate, Lucius. You believe in leverage. He exhaled sharply, frustration flashing across his face. You think I asked for this? His voice dropped low. You think I wanted a stranger to become the only person keeping me alive? The air between us tightened like a wire ready to snap. I could hear my heartbeat, could feel the storm of everything unsaid pressing against my ribs. I don't know what to think anymore, I whispered. Every time I turn around, there's another secret, another piece of your world trying to swallow me whole. Lucius leaned forward, jaw clenched. You're not the only one haunted by ghosts, cara mia. I stopped pacing, staring at him. His eyes, usually so sharp, looked different now, tired, almost human. You saved me before I knew your name, he said quietly. That wasn't manipulation. That was mercy. The sincerity in his tone disarmed me in a way bullets and betrayal never could. For the first time since the crash, I didn't see a man carved from violence. I saw someone drowning in it. Silence stretched again, heavy and alive. The clock on the wall ticked softly. I sank into the chair opposite him, the distance between us shrinking with every breath. I didn't save you for gratitude, I said after a long pause. I just didn't want another ghost on my conscience. Lucius's lips curved faintly. Then perhaps we saved each other. The words hung in the air, fragile and dangerous. I should have left the room then, should have put miles between us and this strange, impossible pull. Instead, I stayed. His hand reached across the desk, slow, tentative, fingers brushing mine. I didn't pull away. The contact was small, barely a whisper of skin, but it felt like the world steadied for a heartbeat. Somewhere beyond the walls, guards murmured, a door closed. The vineyard wind sighed through the cypress trees. Inside, the storm that had followed me since that night in the bay finally quieted. Maybe this wasn't fate or manipulation. Maybe it was something rarer, two ghosts recognizing each other in the wreckage. The garden was quiet, too quiet. I remember that now, though in the moment I only felt the breeze, soft against my cheek, and the weight of the silence just beyond the stone fountain. I'd gone outside for air, to get away from the spiraling thoughts and restless ghosts pacing my ribcage. The moon floated high, casting a cold glow over the vineyard. And then, out of nowhere, a whisper of movement and pain. A cloth was pressed to my face before I could scream. Strong arms wrapped around me, dragging me backward into the trees lining the far wall of the estate. My fingers clawed at the air, at dirt, at nothing. The scent of chemicals flooded my lungs, and the world snapped sideways. The last thing I saw before darkness swallowed me was the blade of the moon vanishing behind cypress. I woke to the sound of water, slapping gently against the wooden slats below me, rhythmic and cruel. My wrists were chained behind my back, cold iron biting into my skin. The floor beneath me creaked with every shift of my weight, damp with salt and rot. I blinked against the dark, my mouth dry, blood dried at my temple. And the smell, fish oil, mildew, gasoline, thick enough to choke on. The walls were wooden, warped with age, beams stained with moss and seaweed. Through the slats in the floor, I saw water lapping inches below. An old boathouse, I realized, built out over a tidal inlet, barely holding together. Ropes hung from rafters above, hooks lined one wall. And in the corner, a man sat, a silhouette, watching. He rose slowly, boots scraping across the boards. "You're awake," he said in a Spanish accent, calm and pleased. A second figure appeared, this one broader, his face obscured by a balaclava. My pulse kicked hard in my chest. "Where am I?" I rasped, though I already knew. "What do you want?" The first man crouched in front of me, tilting my chin with a gloved hand. "Your boyfriend," he said simply. "He's made himself very hard to kill. We thought maybe you'd be easier leverage." I didn't answer. He smiled anyway. "Don't worry. We're not here to hurt you." Much. Pain flared through my side as the second man struck me, not hard enough to break, but sharp, practiced. I gasped, curling into myself, rage lighting beneath the fear. "Tell us where he moved the ledger," the first one said. "The one that lists every shipment Greco touched before Palermo burned." I shook my head. "I don't know anything." Another blow. A little harder. I lost track of how many times they asked. How many times they didn't believe me. The pain blurred into a rhythm, the kind that tries to break you in small, deliberate pieces. But I held on not for answers, but because I knew Lucius would come. He had to. Hours passed. Or minutes. Or lifetimes. Eventually, the men left, locking the boathouse door with a rusty padlock behind them. I was alone again, chained to a rusted pipe bolted to the floor. The water below crept higher. I could hear the tide rising. My window was closing. I twisted, shifting my weight to reach the pipe with my hands behind me. The chain clinked as I tested the rusted metal. It gave, but not enough. My wrists bled as I wrenched against the restraints, grinding the shackle against the corner of the pipe. My breath hissed through clenched teeth, every tug sending fire up my arms. "Come on," I whispered. "Come on," a weak clink, then a crack. The pipe snapped loose from its mooring. My hands were still bound, but I was free of the anchor. I scrambled to my feet and stumbled toward the hatch I'd spotted earlier, half submerged, built into the far wall where the planks bowed. The tide had reached the edge. Salt water sloshed against my ankles. I dropped to my knees, groping for the latch. It resisted, swollen with water and time. I braced both feet against the wall and yanked. The hatch popped open with a groan, a black mouth leading into the sea. I didn't hesitate. I took one breath and dove. The cold hit like a slap. Water rushed over me, salt burning every wound. I swam blind, muscles screaming, metal cuffs still weighing down my wrists. But the tide was on my side. It pulled me under the dock, into open water. I kicked hard, praying I was swimming toward shore. Above the surface, I heard it, gunfire. Muffled pops cracked through the air, then shouts. Lucius's men were here. I surfaced once, gasping, only to see shadows moving along the shore, the orange flash of muzzle fire lighting up the reeds. My arms trembled from the effort, but I turned and swam toward the narrow inlet that curved around the back of the dock. A bullet hissed into the water nearby. I dove again, lungs burning. The next time I surfaced, the sounds were fading. The world had gone quiet, the water calm except for the soft ripple around my neck. I crawled onto the muddy shore, my limbs trembling too hard to stand. My knees gave out, and I collapsed onto my side. My body shook from cold, from adrenaline, from the knowledge that I had almost died. Footsteps pounded toward me. I tensed, too weak to run again. But then I heard it, his voice. Concetta. Lucius, breathless, blood on his shirt, eyes wild as he dropped to his knees beside me. His hands cupped my face, desperate. You came back, I whispered, voice shaking. His arms wrapped around me, pulling me in, his own body shuddering from the relief. Always, he said, forehead against mine. I'll always come for you. I closed my eyes, letting the sound of his heartbeat drown out everything else. For the first time since Lucius didn't speak for hours after pulling me from the shore. He kept one arm around me in the back seat of the SUV, his eyes fixed ahead, unmoving. The silence between us wasn't hollow, it vibrated with something deeper, something final. When we reached the vineyard, Matteo and the others were waiting, their eyes dark with questions. But Lucius only said 3 words, "It's over. Burn it." The following days moved with a strange, purposeful rhythm, like time itself had stepped into the fire with us. Lucius met in shadowed rooms with men who owed him favors, made calls to banks across oceans, signed final transfers with hands that no longer shook. He sold off the rest of his legitimate holdings first, the shell companies, the trade lines, the ports. Then came the deeper cuts, weapons routes, false ID printers, vault locations. Every thread of power he had once held like a god, he cut loose like it meant nothing. I watched it all unfold from the edges of the room, unsure whether to be afraid or in awe. Matteo protested at first, then fell quiet once he understood Lucius wasn't negotiating. He wasn't stepping down, he was dismantling. Brick by brick, blood by blood. This empire made me, Lucius told me one night, fingers trailing the edge of a burning contract. But you made me want to be something else. It was hard not to fall deeper then, to see the man he could have been if the world hadn't turned him into a weapon. I tried to stop him once, during a meeting where he signed off on abandoning 3 safe houses and wiping entire accounts. You don't have to do this for me, I said softly. He looked up, tired eyes meeting mine with something like peace. I'm not doing it for you, he said. I'm doing it because of you. Every decision after that felt irreversible. Matteo cleared the estate of all non-essential staff. Guards were replaced with trusted lieutenants from Lucius's past life, the ones who still believed in loyalty without leverage. Weapons were gathered, mapped, then moved. Lucius built a final plan like a conductor composing his last symphony. And I stood at his side, knowing we were both walking toward the edge of something. The final strike was planned for midnight, a coordinated hit on 2 of his most dangerous rivals. Lucius had planted the seeds years ago, weak points, crumbling alliances, insider debts. Now he'd light the match. It wasn't just revenge. It was erasure. Concetta, he'd said, this ends one of 2 ways: they find us and kill us, or we vanish before they ever get the chance. I asked if vanishing meant letting go of everything. He nodded. Everything but you. In that moment, the girl who'd once cataloged starfish realized she'd never go back to that world again. And maybe she didn't want to. We left the vineyard the night before, just after sundown. A decoy convoy was staged to draw attention to a border crossing. The rail plan moved under moonlight, a silent procession toward the last warehouse Lucius had once called a crown jewel. It stored money, weapons, and leverage. It would become kindling. The detonation was set remotely, but Lucius insisted on watching it happen. We sat in a borrowed car atop a hill, engine off, headlights dead, surrounded by cypress and dust. The timer ticked down quietly beside him. I held my breath, even though we were miles away. When the explosion hit, the night lit up like judgment. The fire bled across the skyline in blooming orange, swallowing steel and secrets. One by one, the structures collapsed inward, swallowed by smoke. I turned to Lucius, his face illuminated by the reflection of everything he'd built and now burned. He didn't smile. He didn't blink. He only whispered, "No more shadows." We drove away just before the second wave of charges went off. Behind us, the last vestiges of his empire folded into the earth. His enemies would find only ash and silence when they came searching. He reached over, laced his fingers through mine, and exhaled. "We're ghosts now," he said. He was right. In the eyes of the world, Lucius Greco was dead, a victim of betrayal, vanished in a blaze of war. And I? Just another name on a casualty list no one would bother to verify. We had forged new IDs, rerouted everything through a forgotten safe house outside Florence. In every legal and illegal ledger that mattered, we no longer existed. Somewhere in that drive through the dark, we stopped being fugitives and started becoming something else. Not civilians. Not criminals. Something in between. Survivors. And maybe something like free. At dawn, the sun spilled over the horizon like it had missed the memo about everything that had burned. Lucius pulled over beside an old olive grove and cut the engine. We sat there in the stillness, letting the silence stretch. His face turned toward the light, eyes closed, breathing steady. "Feels like the first morning," he murmured. I didn't answer right away. I just reached over and touched his shoulder, the place where a scar peeked above his collar. "We're really doing this?" I asked. He opened his eyes, no fear there now, only clarity. "We already did." In the rearview mirror, the flames were nothing more than a memory of gold smoke on the wind. We had no names, no nation, no master, just each other and a road that curved into a future we hadn't yet imagined. And I realized that the girl who once feared drowning had learned how to burn. Would you be brave enough to burn everything down and start over even if it meant becoming someone new? Let us know in the comments, and if this story lit a fire in you, subscribe to follow the next part of Concetta and Lucius's journey. The ashes aren't the end, they're just the beginning. The villa overlooked the sea like it had been waiting for someone to start over there. Tucked high in the cliffs above the Amalfi coast, it was all terracotta stone, wind-worn shutters, and silence thick enough to breathe. The path to the door was unmarked, shaded by lemon trees that trembled with ocean breeze. We arrived under aliases that didn't belong to us, but now belonged only to us. In every official system that still worked, Concetta Capon and Lucius Greco were gone. Inside, the house smelled like citrus and old wood, the rooms sun-drenched and hushed. There were no guards, no meetings, no calls intercepted in code, just the sound of waves breaking far below and the occasional hum of cicadas. Lucius moved slower now, healing still, his steps deliberate, but each day he stood a little straighter. The sling cradling his shoulder no longer looked like a battle wound, it looked like recovery. And every morning, he made the coffee without asking if I wanted any. I spent long hours on the back terrace, staring at the sea, trying to reconcile who I was with who I now had to be. I used to watch water for its patterns, how it curled around rocks, how it cradled life. Now I studied it for escape routes. For the horizon. I told myself we had made it, that we'd survived the kind of war people don't come back from. And yet, sometimes I still woke gasping, the scent of gasoline and blood thick in my throat. Lucius gave me space. Not distance, never that, but space to breathe, to ache, to find my footing again. He never asked me to talk, but he always listened when I did. Some days we were quiet companions, passing plates and pouring wine without words. Other days we shared long conversations about nothing, whether the storms here were stronger than in Sicily, or if lemons grew better in shadow. The strangest part was how ordinary it all started to feel. One night, I caught him in the kitchen trying to chop herbs one-handed, his movements clumsy but determined. He swore in Italian under his breath as a sprig of rosemary slipped off the board. I stepped behind him, hands covering his, guiding the motion with gentle pressure. "You're going to lose a finger," I teased. "If I do," he said, deadpan, "will you still eat the pasta?" I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in what felt like weeks. That night turned into music and a second bottle of wine, the kind of evening where the world felt like it had forgiven us for surviving. Lucius reached for me with a sheepish smile, muttering something about having no rhythm. I took his uninjured hand and placed it on my waist anyway. We danced barefoot in the kitchen, swaying slowly beneath a cracked ceiling fan. The song was old and scratchy, but his touch was warm, his breath soft against my temple. But the past never really lets go, it just changes shape. We sat on the terrace the next morning, watching the sky burn into soft pinks and coral. I could tell something was shifting behind his quiet. He turned to me, eyes darker than usual, mouth drawn. "You know what scared me most?" he asked. I shook my head. "Not dying," he said. "Losing you. Not getting to tell you any of this." I didn't know how to respond. So I reached for his hand and held it, steady and firm. He didn't say, "I love you," but it was there in the set of his jaw, in the tremble he tried to hide, in the way he looked at me like I was the last good thing he'd touched. "I'm still here," I whispered. "And I'm not going anywhere." He nodded once, like that was enough. Like it always had been. Then he leaned forward and pressed a kiss to my forehead, soft and sure. "Wherever you go," he said, his voice low but certain, "I go." And for the first time in all the chaos, I believed him. It's been 7 days since we disappeared into flame and fog, a week since the empire turned to ash behind us. In the world's eyes, Lucius Greco is dead, his name folded into crime reports and conspiracy theories no one will ever solve. My name didn't make the papers, but it doesn't have to. The woman I used to be is gone too, buried somewhere between the wreckage and the waves. We're ghosts now, just like he promised, invisible, untouchable, free. The villa is quiet, but the beach is quieter. It stretches out below the cliffs like it's always been here waiting, untouched by everything we've done or undone. In the mornings, the tide brushes the shore like a memory, and at night, the moon turns the water silver. That's where we walk, barefoot and side by side, saying nothing, saying everything. The sea doesn't ask for explanations, and maybe that's why I trust it. Today, the sand is warm, the wind gentle, the sky bruised with late sun. Lucius walks beside me, hands in his pockets, his sling finally gone, though he still favors his left arm. We don't talk about the past unless it finds us first, in the silence between steps, or in the way our eyes meet after a bad dream. He brushes my hand with his now an unspoken question. I lace my fingers through his without a word. I used to think surviving meant returning to who I was before, the quiet girl in the lab coat, watching crabs crawl through tidopools, grieving a father the sea swallowed. But I've learned that survival changes you. It breaks and rebuilds. The girl who used to apologize for taking up space wouldn't recognize the one who now walks beside a man who burned down his world to protect her. And the truth is, I don't want to go back. I've held a knife. I've buried secrets. I've looked men in the eye and chosen to live when they wanted me dead. That changes you in ways no one prepares you for. But it also shows you who you're underneath everything. Lucius says I'm dangerous now, he means it like a compliment. You move like someone who's been to hell and mapped the exit, he said once. I smiled, but I didn't tell him that I still wake up listening for gunfire, still flinch when a floorboard creaks. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It just means choosing peace even when your body remembers the war. Tonight, we cooked dinner together, barefoot again, music playing low on the old radio we found in a pantry drawer. Lucius laughed when I nearly set the bread on fire, and I laughed when he dropped a whole jar of olives trying to open it one-handed. The simplicity of it felt like rebellion. Like we were stealing normal from the jaws of everything we'd escaped. And we still are. After dinner, we walked down to the beach again. The sun had just begun to dip, painting the horizon in molten gold. The waves kissed our ankles. The world felt impossibly far away. He reached for me and pulled me into him without asking. We didn't speak for a long time. The wind moved through his shirt. My cheek pressed against his chest, and I could feel the steady beat of his heart, not fast, not slow, just there. He's still here. I'm still here. That's enough. I thought of the girl who jumped into the freezing water that night, not knowing who she'd find in the wreckage. She hadn't planned it. She hadn't hesitated. She just moved because something inside her refused to let someone drown alone. That version of me was terrified and brave anyway. And Lucius? He's not the man I pulled from the cockpit. That man was broken and bleeding, full of secrets, drowning in shadows. But now he looks at me like I'm the lighthouse that pulled him to shore. And maybe I am. He brushes a hand down my back and tilts my chin up gently. You saved me, he says, like it still surprises him. So did you, I whisper back, because it's true. Not just in the alleyways and safe houses, but in the moments that followed. The ones that made surviving worth it. We kiss beneath the streaked sky, slow, certain, the kind of kiss that knows the world will always be dangerous, but that we're not alone in it anymore. His arms wrap around me, strong and sure, as the waves pull in and out like a breath we've finally stopped holding. The sun drops below the line of the sea. Night will come, but not fear. And as he leans his forehead to mine, I know this isn't just some fleeting calm before the next storm. It's a choice. To live. To rebuild. To protect. I was just the girl who jumped in the water. But now, I'm the one he would burn the world to protect. Thank you for listening to this story until the very end. There's another interesting one on your left screen that I think you'll really enjoy.